do right here is go back. Way back. Back into time.
We can rebuild him. We have the technology.
Celebrating 20 years of New England Championship Wrestling. This is the ReGeneration Podcast.
And now, here are your hosts, Sheldon Goldberg, Joe Matarazzo, and Kevin Castro.
Welcome, everyone, to the ReGeneration Podcast, celebrating 20 years of New England Championship Wrestling. I'm Sheldon Goldberg, joined as always by Joe Matarazzo and Kevin Castro. And guys, it's good to have you aboard. Joe, how you doing?
Doing well. No complaints. Hope everybody out there is safe, wearing your masks, washing your hands, and listening to us.
Absolutely. Not necessarily in that order.
Right.
Kevin, how are you?
Not bad. I will complain, though. I've been washing my hands so much and hand sanitizer. Now my hands burn and it's cold outside. And,
Yuck.
you know, just grumpy, I guess.
We'll get you some gloves. Nice set of mittens.
There we go.
That'll work for you. All right. Well, we have an interesting show for you this week. We're going to hop across the pond, as they say. We're going to take a look at two matches involving British stars that took place in New England Championship Wrestling. Those matches, of course, part of the NECW 20th Anniversary Collection. The links to those matches are in the description below. We're going to take a look at the anarchist Doug Williams, former British Heavyweight Champion, former TNA Tag Team Champion, former TNA X Division Champion, former IWGP Tag Team Champion, former Pro Wrestling Noah Tag Team Champion, very decorated wrestler, taking on a man who would become a little later the NECW Heavyweight Champion, Maverick Wild. That match taking place June 22nd of 2001. And then from there, we're going to be going a year forward. We're going to take a look at Johnny Storm, the Wonder Kid, Johnny Storm, taking on Jody Fleisch, the Phoenix Jody Fleisch, two British high flyers, two of the best who are actually still active and still wrestling these days. That match from June 24th of 2002. We're going to have some bonus video that we're going to show you, and there's going to be a secret link, which we'll tell you about a little bit later, a secret link to some other video that I think you'll enjoy. So let's get right down to it. The anarchist Doug Williams making his second appearance in New England Championship Wrestling, taking on Maverick Wild. Doug Williams made his American debut in New England Championship Wrestling in September of 2000. It was the second show that NECW put on in Wethersfield, Connecticut. Neither one of you guys were around for this, so I'm going to have to ask you for your fresh perspective on those matches. And let's start with you, Joe.
Sure. I mean, obviously, I know who Doug Williams is. I've known who Doug Williams has been. Maverick Wild, again, NECW alumnus, but I've never really watched a Maverick Wild match. I've seen clips and pieces and things like that, so to get to watch an actual Maverick Wild match, and the fact that he went up against Doug Williams, who I've known very much on from watching him on TV, I was very impressed. I thought it was a very evenly match with the two of them. Watching the British style, I think Maverick actually adjusted to it very well, and I think that's more how it went. I think Maverick had to adjust to Doug. I think Doug had a lot more seasoning at the time, it seemed. Seeing Doug pull out a rolling German suplex, which I haven't seen, that was 01, so you're talking 19, almost 20 years ago,
right? That
happened. And I think the next time I've seen that has been Chad Gable. Yeah, he's the only person who I've seen do it since then. Which is amazing in and of itself. One of the things I know is I didn't realize how good Maverick can sell. Maverick Wild was selling the entire match. Even when he was blowing his comeback, he was still selling as he was going. That kid had some stuff. I really liked it. It was a nice showing, the way to have it end in a draw. I thought it was dynamite, set up for the next month. Not great match. Lot of move for move, catch as catch can. It was a great style to watch.
Kevin, what do you think?
I think Joe stole my notes because he hit every single thing. That the only difference was I mentioned it was a very hot opening sequence that was very fast paced. Other than that, almost verbatim everything that I had. Yeah, I agree that it was like we were talking about last week. As far as you go in there with the best, and you come out better than you were. I definitely think that this was a good learning experience for Maverick. I think that, like Joe said, he had to adjust his style to work with Doug Williams. I'm not a fan of draws. I like to have an actual winner. I understand why it was that way to set up the other match. Again, just looking at it from my perspective, I might have done some sort of a controversial ending that would bring on another match. But I mean, it all made sense. I thought it was great. Was this pre-Ring of Honor? Was Ring of Honor around?
Ring of Honor would come into play soon thereafter.
Yeah, that was one of the things that really jumped out, that it was almost like predating that style that was about to blow up across the country.
Yeah, precursor to it. Yeah.
We actually brought Doug Williams to Ring of Honor, where he became the Ring of Honor Pure Champion, as opposed to the Impure Champion, I guess, or the Polluted Champion. I don't know. I never got that
plenty
title.
Of those guys.
I never got that title.
It's interesting too, because Doug Williams is almost underappreciated. I feel like he's not really mentioned that often. But if you watch his stuff, like you said, that Rolling German was unbelievable
and come out of nowhere.
Everything he did was so fluid, and I think that if people studied his work, that again they're just gonna improve their game.
Absolutely. Some backstory on the match and on Doug Williams. How Doug Williams got to us, and I'm hoping that I can remember this correctly. I believe, if I am not mistaken, that he was brought to my attention. I had seen matches of his because I'm a fan of British wrestling. I like to watch the old World of Sport matches on YouTube, and you couldn't get them on YouTube, but because there was no YouTube at that point. But I used to get tapes of them. Tom Burke was the one that introduced me to the British style of professional wrestling, which is the round system. In England, the traditional British wrestling is done in rounds, much like boxing. A very different style, a more technical style, and Doug was very well established over there in England and in Europe. He'd been a star over there for quite some time and was looking to make some headway in the United States. I want to say it was a referee who worked for us by the name of Rich Lannon who made me aware of him, or put him on my radar. He was coming to the U.S. because his mom lives in America. He was coming to the U.S. and wanted to know if he could get on the show. He was coming on vacation and wanted to know if he could wrestle for NECW. I guess he tried a number of other companies and nobody wanted him, and I wanted him instantly because I had seen him. I knew that he was a great technician and he'd be a great addition. And I remember the first time he wrestled for us in Wethersfield, Connecticut, there's an old saying in wrestling about a match selling out the curtain, meaning that all the boys would gather around and watch the match. Walter Kowalski was there, and he was on the show that night, not wrestling, but managing Mike Hollow. He was there, and him and a bunch of other guys were watching that match very intently, and Kowalski just lit up when he saw Williams. He just, he loved that guy. Thought he was tremendous. Went over to him and complimented him. So he came back numerous times on his own dime. We never flew him in. He paid it his own way. We paid him to wrestle, but and we put him up, but we never paid his trip. We never flew him over. He was making an investment to try to get known in the United States because he'd done pretty much all he could do in the UK and in Europe. That turned out to be a very good investment for him because two things happened. One was Ring of Honor, but prior to Ring of Honor, he worked a tournament in San Francisco called the King of Indies. And that tournament got a lot of buzz in the newsletters and on the internet. moved a lot of tapes and so forth, and so he became quite the item because of that. And I remember at the time I was on the board of directors of the Cauliflower Alley Club, and another guy who was on the board of directors was the late Dick Beyer, the Destroyer, who was at the time still very much involved with Pro Wrestling Noah, which had kind of succeeded All Japan. And I said to Dick, I called him up and I said, listen, there's a kid that's going out there named Doug Williams who had just worked for me, and he's the real deal. He's got Noah written all over him. You need to really, look out for this guy. And he got him into Noah. So Doug made a great gentleman, too, by the way. A real pleasure to be around, a real pleasure to deal with. He managed to make quite a career for himself because he was the real deal. And one of the things about the 2-match series, he actually wrestled 3 matches with Maverick. The first one was the very first one when he came over. That was in Connecticut. And then when we started running in Good Times, we made a 2-match program out of it. And the idea was to elevate Maverick, which actually worked very well. I think Maverick would tell you that, that was one of his favorite matches, is wrestling Doug Williams. Definitely upped his game. And again, as we talked about last week, when you have people like this, they're essentially special attractions. They enhance the company in a big way. Doug had made other appearances for us after that. He was in the very first Iron 8 that we did. He didn't win it, but he was in the very first one. So, he would come in and he would always elevate a card. That's a guy always. The British stars, back then in the U.S., people weren't really so hip to British wrestling. The British wrestling scene in recent years has really become something with a lot of buzz behind it. Of course, WWE has a whole NXT UK. They've really invested in the United Kingdom. But, in the U.S., you'd see guys like Billy Robinson and Tony Charles, British people who would come and relocate to the United States and wrestle here back in the old days. But stateside, many people were not aware of British wrestling and what the differences are. And the quality of the guys that came out of there's some tremendous, tremendous workers. One that comes to mind immediately would be the exotic Adrian Street, who moved to the United States. Right. A wrestler's wrestler. Williams is in the same category, a wrestler's wrestler. And, England became a place that we would go to for talent. Once Doug came over here, people knew there was an open door. And when we talk about the other match that we're going to talk about today, which is the Wonder Kid Johnny Storm against the Phoenix Jody Fleisch, the door was open to British talent. They knew that they had a place in the U.S. that would welcome them. Storm and Fleisch were a couple of kids who had a lot of experience in England. They were very successful over there. Jody Fleisch had wrestled in Japan for Michinoku Pro Wrestling under the name Doc Chan and had a lot of success over there. 2 great high flyers. Again, they were looking to break into the United States and were doing kind of a barnstorming tour. They decided to come over for 6 weeks or something like that. And a mutual friend put them in touch with me, and we booked them. We had them in, and then we brought them to Ring of Honor the night after their appearance, along with Doug Williams and Sumi Sakai. That was all on one NECW card, so we had a lot of international talent at that time, and that was a hell of a card. But Storm and Fleisch, what were your thoughts, Joe?
I'm probably going to steal some of Kevin's notes again.
Why not? Did it the first time, so...
That's right. Yeah, well, I might as well keep going.
Right.
What a fast-paced match this was. Obviously, you could tell these guys have worked together for years. And it's funny, too, because in doing a little research on them, you will literally find hundreds of matches on YouTube of these guys, between them tagging together, between them fighting each other, ladder matches, 3-way matches. These guys have worked together forever. It's almost like they're the same person. The poor referee, Josh, he was, that kid was blown up in the first. I think by the second false finish that came up, that poor kid was dying.
He could lick his shoe standing up.
That poor kid, he was unbelievable.
Yeah.
But man, just some big moves. I'll tell you what, for an indie show, these guys, they were in there, and this was at Good Times.
Emporium, yeah.
So I'll tell you what, when he did the shooting star press, Jody Fleisch, off the ropes into the crowd on top of Johnny Storm, you would have thought he was in Madison Square Garden. The way he attempted and just went after that some big moves. They were really out to impress. And
absolutely.
There's a point where, like Kevin, we've been talking about this, all the guys trying to get all this shit in, as opposed to making everything matter. These guys made that matter while getting their shit in, which you could, no wonder why they went so long and they're still out there today.
Right. And Jody Fleisch, if you see him today, he put on like 25, 30 pounds of muscle. The kid is in tremendous shape.
It's amazing.
Unbelievable shape. Kevin, what were your thoughts when you watched this?
I absolutely loved this match. And just to talk to people who are listening right now, who are used to HD and won't watch anything longer than 7-8 minutes, take the time and watch this match. It was, again, as Joe was saying, the match had everything. It had heavy impact, it had high flying, it had MC Hammer pants. It was fantastic. There's a guy in the crowd singing the chorus MC Hammer songs pretty much throughout the entire match.
Yes, you did.
They had like the old school standoff, towards the beginning, that they're countering each other. They had the old school, almost like the ECW standoff. The pin transitions, just one after another, and it's not the typical transitions that you see in almost every other match. They were pulling out stuff that either I hadn't seen before or I hadn't seen in years. Like Joe said, the shooting star press to the outside was insane. And can you imagine the people sitting in the front that were right there seeing that?
Yeah.
Yep.
I absolutely loved Johnny Storm's victory run through the crowd after he hit the somersault plancha. He hits the ground and then just keeps going, and he's running through everybody and then just comes back. The torture rack neck breaker, Fleisch's moonsault was almost like it was in slow motion. It was beautiful. I mean, I definitely say that take the time, watch this match, and I don't want to say steal everything they do, because I don't think people will be able to do it as well.
Right.
But yeah, definitely watch this, learn from it, and I don't know, talk with a British accent.
Tell you how. Yes.
Drink your tea while you're watching it.
Exactly. Have a crumpet.
And a crumpet.
Yes.
That's it.
Yes. No, they were great kids. They were really terrific, and I still hear from them now and then.
That's
great. Just it was such a breath of fresh air to see talent like this on independent shows in New England.
Can you imagine if you had to go on after them?
Oh, God. Yeah.
Throw your boots away.
Right.
Yep.
You think back to that period of NECW in this little arcade. Well, it wasn't little, but I mean, in this little space in this giant arcade, that you got to see all these people, international stars and people who had become gigantic talents in this industry. I mean, it's amazing when you think back to it. And one of the great things about this series is that we have it all documented.
Right.
Yeah.
And what's funny too, looking at it, like as I was joking around having to go on after them, the perfect opportunity for whoever would go on after them after the crowd was so hyped up after seeing everything that they did. You go out there, you do an old school involving the crowd match.
Right.
Yep.
That's all you would have to, because the crowd's already sitting there, that they're ready for it because of everything that they did. They did so much that the next people that went out there could have just coasted.
Done 5 moves.
Right.
Yep.
And that's it. The
Right.
whole for 10 minutes, 5 moves had that crowd out of their minds.
Absolutely.
Yep.
But you're talking about the cutting edge of pro wrestling at the time. That was NECW. Believe it or not. It sounds silly when you hear it now, but it's not silly. That is exactly what it was. We were on the cutting edge of global pro wrestling at that point in time. Between the Brits and Sumi and, in later years, the Australians. We've had people from Ireland, Fergal Devitt, who became Finn Balor. There were a number of others.
Australia.
Canada. Yeah. We'll get into Canada a little bit more later in the series. We were blessed to have a lot of great talent from a lot of places. I look at it that we were very, very fortunate to have been able to do it. But the other side of it is that we were savvy enough to have an open door to it, which a lot of other people didn't. A lot of other people, we'll just use the local guys, or their companies run by wrestlers, and we're not going to let anybody else in. This is just for our friends and our buddies and our pals, and forget about anybody else. But anyway, we've got a bonus feature for you this week. We're going to take you back to September 24th of 2009, something that we talked about a couple of weeks ago. We talked about the Golden Greek Alex Arion, and we talked about a program involving him and Al Snow, and how we used our radio show when we were on radio at the time, the Mouthpiece Wrestling Show on 1510 The Zone, how we used the radio show as a means to set up a program between Alex Arion and his trainer, Al Snow. Let's take you to that footage right now. Welcome back to NECW TV. A few weeks ago on the Mouthpiece Wrestling Show, hosted by yours truly and NECW TV's Joe Matarazzo, the Golden Greek Alex Arion was with us, and we had a little surprise for him, which resulted in a challenge. Let's take you to the audio of that right now. Alex Arion, you and I go back a very long way.
Yes, we do.
Talking about this. What a lot of people don't know about you is that the guy who was really responsible for you getting into wrestling was Al Snow.
Sheldon, let me stop you right there. That's actually kind of not really that true. I take offense to that, actually. Al Snow, he had a wrestling school. I went there and I trained, but Al Snow didn't really do much for me as far as, help me get started with my career. He just gave me a ring to learn in. He didn't really have that big a part, so I kind of take offense to that. Wow. I kind of did a lot of this on my own. What you see is what you get because I'm just that good.
He wasn't any help to you at all, in other words.
He picked me up from the airport, that's about it.
Are you serious?
I'm 100% serious. Why would I lie about something like that?
Really? Well, it just so happens that we have Al Snow on the line right now. I wanted to kind of have a little reunion here between the two of you.
Al Snow's on the phone now.
Al, are you with us?
How you doing, Sheldon?
I'm good.
And,
what?
I'm sort of a little stunned and a little bit embarrassed.
It's funny. I was on hold here, and I appreciate you setting up, this phone call and your radio show. It's been a long time since I've seen or spoken to Alex.
Al, how have you been?
Alex came to me and asked me to break him into the wrestling business, a business that apparently I had nothing to do with him getting into. Contrary to what you may think, I got you in this business. I taught you what you know. And, I consider myself to be responsible for every single person I get in. And I consider myself to be responsible for you. So I wanted to, kind of touch base with you, kind of have a little bit of a reunion on the phone. And I thought it would be a pleasant conversation, but, a little bit shocked that you'd say that all I picked you up from the airport.
All right, I'll give you this much, Al. You taught me how to do a headlock, so thank you for that.
Oh, come on.
Thank you for that.
Wow.
What? What?
That's not fair.
That's what? It's truth. He taught me how to do a headlock to pick me up at the airport. So you're disappointed. You're disappointed in how I act and my behavior. You know what? The way I act, my behavior, my attitude, as you call it, that's what got me to where I am right now. I'm one of the top guys around here, okay? And I don't need you or Sheldon or anybody else telling me they don't approve of my attitude.
Well, that wasn't always your attitude.
Whoa. Hold on a second here. First off, I'm not telling you anything. You do whatever you want, man. You make your own choices. But the problem is that your choices and your actions reflect back on me. Because regardless of whether you want to admit it or not, I taught you a lot more than just how to take a headlock. I'm responsible for the fact that you're even in this business and able to even lace up a pair of boots. And apparently one of the things that I was remiss in teaching you was a lesson in respect.
Respect for who, Al?
Learn that lesson and learn it quick.
Respect for who? Who's going to teach me that lesson, Al? Who's going to teach me that? You going to teach me that lesson?
Boy,
I mean, really? Come on. What are y'all? Here we going.
Well, apparently, like I said, I didn't teach you that lesson the first time, so maybe I should come over there and teach it to you now. What do you think?
Yo, you're going to come here now? I'd like to see that.
Oh, boy.
I'd love to see that.
Al, are you making a challenge?
Shut up. Sheldon, how about, we make an arrangement and you see if you can't get me booked there in the NECW and make me a match with my boy Alex there so that maybe I can come there and challenge the lesson that he needs to learn.
I'll tell you what, if you're willing to do that, I'll make that happen. I can make that happen.
You're going to make that happen? You're going to make that? That's great. You know what, Al? I look forward to you trying to teach me a lesson in respect. I welcome that challenge.
I am going to make this match happen.
I want a front row seat for this one.
I'm going to make this match happen.
Please do, Sheldon.
Al,
please. I would really appreciate it because I tell you right now, I have a reputation to protect. I've spent 27 years building a name in this business, and I'd be damned if I'm going to let any kid that I have broken into this business ruin or besmirch my reputation. You, Alex, you or nobody else ever speaks to me that way. And I guarantee you, punk, you're going to pay for it. I'm going to make sure your breath smells like shoe polish.
Since the match was made and accepted prior to the suspension of the Golden Greek Alex Arion, the NECW Championship Committee has ordered that the match take place Thanksgiving weekend, Night of Champions. It'll be teacher versus student. Al Snow versus the Golden Greek Alex Arion, one of the huge matches to take place in NECW's Night of Champions weekend in Plymouth and in Somerset. So that was a unique way of using a medium that we had control of to promote our events.
It was a lot of fun.
That was broadcast live from the world-famous Golden Banana in Peabody, Massachusetts.
Yes, a almost gentleman type club.
Now, Kevin, you weren't around for that, so I'm interested in your impressions.
No, I wasn't. First off, just listening to the music in the background, I was trying to figure out what that was as you guys were talking. I know it was Running. I don't remember who sang it. But anyways, the thing I liked about that so much is that it's such...
There was music?
Sorry. It's such a simple, believable story.
Right.
You don't have to go crazy with things. He just came out and he said, like, the best part, he picked me up at the airport. Oh, okay,
right.
So you headlock. Just, like, the audacity and the arrogance of those simple little lines to say to someone like Al Snow, it's just it wouldn't only just aggravate Al, but anyone that knows the history of Al Snow and his training. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
That was not scripted at all. I don't even know that they even discussed it beforehand. They just winged it right there, which was great. I mean, that's another feather in the cap of Alex Arion, is his ability to, be a very convincing heel and be one on the mic.
To organically have something like that too, as opposed to trying to remember what somebody else wants you to say, and I think we said it before. When it's not your words, it's not convincing. You
right.
can't. You can't really buy into it.
Right. He played the perfect douche nozzle. You just wanted to smack him right then and there.
Right.
That's him.
Why isn't that a shirt?
Well, you never know. Could be.
Could be.
Yeah,
Patent pending.
yeah, exactly. It's funny. I don't even remember the match that they had that this led to. I don't.
It was at Memorial Hall in
Yes,
Plymouth.
in Plymouth, right? That much I remember. I don't remember the match itself.
I graduated in that building.
And you, it was a good building. That was a lot of fun in that building. We called that match that night. I'd like to find the footage of that match and see how that came out.
I don't believe I have it.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't believe I have it. I'll search around more, but I haven't. It hasn't turned up yet.
That night we had Little Guido there.
Yeah.
We had Blue Meanie.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had Al Snow was in Pat's Pit that night. We had a lot of things go on that. Really, we don't have that footage, huh?
I haven't found it. I will look some more, but I have not to this moment found it. You know, I do have a few gaps in what I have here, but I'm sure it's around someplace.
Sure.
It just hasn't turned up yet. But
there was some footage from that show we had on NECW TV.
I'll have to look it up.
Yeah. We'll
If we can't find it, let's just grab everyone that was there and we'll just redo it.
Oh, there you go.
I'm up for it.
Sure. Why not? Why not?
This time you'll be there.
Yeah. Anyway, continuing on the theme of international talent in NECW, we have a bonus for you this week. It's a secret link. Well, it won't be a secret after I tell you about it, but it's not a public link. It's a link to the promotion that preceded New England Championship Wrestling, the Century Wrestling Alliance. It's an edition of the Mass Madness television show. And I sent you guys the link, so I don't know if you've had a chance to watch it.
Yes.
But it's a show that involves a couple of things. It opens with the latter part of a match between Kevin Sullivan and Jimmy Snuka from Bellingham, Massachusetts, with a special guest appearance by former New England Patriot Steve Nelson. And from there, it goes to Chelsea, Massachusetts, and a 6-man match involving stars of Michinoku Pro Wrestling. And they would be, on one side, the Great Sasuke, Gran Hamada, and Gran Naniwa, taking on Taka Michinoku, Dick Togo of Kaientai, and Terry Boy. So, a lot of fun there. That was my first foray into dealings with international talent, which is a long story I won't get into on this edition of the show, but we'll get into it in another point. But I ended up being the one to instigate their visit to the United States that ended up with them appearing on the ECW pay-per-view Barely Legal, the first ECW pay-per-view, and also on the same trip, I brought the Great Sasuke, anyway, to Titan Tower to meet with Jim Ross and Bruce Pritchard, and eventually Sasuke wrestled for WWF, and Togo and Taka Michinoku were signed as part of Kaientai. So a lot of stuff there to unpack, as Conrad Thompson would say, but maybe a little too much for this particular episode, but we'll get to it at another point. But great memories of Tony Rumble, great memories of international talent in New England, and my first foray into dealing with international talent. Sasuke, by the way, on that trip brought a whole crew of guys with him. It wasn't just the 6 that you saw on that match. He had another guy, an American, that was living in Japan and wrestling for Michinoku by the name of Beef Wellington, and a kid who would eventually get signed to WCW, who was making his first appearance on the East Coast. He'd also wrestled for Michinoku, Lenny Lane.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Yeah, Lenny Lane was on that card, and Kevin Sullivan was there as well. So Kevin Sullivan met Lenny Lane. Kevin watched his match, and Lenny Lane got signed to WCW. So that was something that came out of that particular weekend. A lot of things happened around myself and the late Boston Bad Boy Tony Rumble. So that was a very memorable episode of that television show, and a very memorable series of events. So, Kevin? What did you think of that?
was blown away by it because I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, again, as I've said before, these people going into an independent show, which I'm very mad that I wasn't aware that this was going on at the time. I think this is when I was just kind of finding out about the different independents in the area.
Right.
But can you imagine going to you think you go into the local show and having some of the biggest names in Japanese wrestling right there in front of you? Because this happened before Barely Legal, correct?
That's correct, yes.
Yeah.
This was the Michinoku TV appearances that led up to Barely Legal. Because ECW was in town that same weekend. So we did Webster, Massachusetts, and we did the Wonderland dog track.
Yeah. That's where I used to go to the shows all the time.
Right. And then that CWA show was in the Chelsea Armory, which is no longer there. I think they turned it into something else or tore it down or whatever. That was a great little armory.
It had a great house, too.
Yes.
There was a real good crowd there.
Yes.
In Bellingham, too.
Oh, my God. Bellingham was sold out. I was not there in Bellingham that night because I was with the Michinoku guys driving them around.
And it was funny, too, because Snooker looked old and Kevin Sullivan looked the exact same.
Right.
Which I'm guessing has to do with Hellfire and Devil Worship and stuff like that, but I'm not 100% sure. Don't quote me on it. I wouldn't recommend trying it.
Right.
But
it's pretty amazing stuff. Having to find that as I was going through old footage, and I said, we got to get that up online.
Well, the opening credits, or the beginning of it, the names that are in that video, Bam Bam Bigelow, Terry Funk, Abdullah the Butcher, Public Enemy, so many giant names, again, at the local independent show.
Right. I mean, those were the days. That was the last gasp, really, of the era of the sold show, the telemarketed show. And for those of you that don't know what I'm talking about, independent wrestling in New England in that period, which is the 90s and before, if there weren't World Wrestling Federation spot shows that were like in high schools or whatever, it was what are called telemarketed shows, which means that a company like a telemarketing company would take a contract with a local police department or a local fire department or some sort of a charitable cause or organization, a school maybe that's looking to raise money, and the wrestling show would be the vehicle to raise funds. So you go to the matches and you'd get this program, and the program had all these ads. It looked like a phone book almost, and that's because these telemarketers, which was a bunch of people in a boiler room, would call everybody in the town and saying, we're doing a fundraiser for the police, it's a wrestling show, would you like to buy an ad? And that was how they made their money. They would make $40,000 or $50,000 on ads in the program, and whether they actually sold the tickets or gave them away wouldn't make any difference. And the promoter of the show, whether it was Tony Rumble or whether it was Walter Kowalski or whether it was Richard Byrne or whoever, they would get a flat fee to put the show on and pay everybody based off of that. So that's what we mean by a sold show. Sometimes you hear them called bot shows. It means the same thing. It means that somebody paid a flat fee for that event, and it was basically a fundraising vehicle. So, and the people who bought the Bellingham show is a telemarketing company that was headed by Steve Nelson, who you see in the video, and Fred Smirlis, a former Patriot. They had a telemarketing company, and they bought shows from Tony Rumble. They bought a number of them. So that's the 411 behind the business model of Tony Rumble's Century Wrestling Alliance and later NWA New England. And what happened as time went on, up to the point that Tony had passed away, is that business was drying up because of the Attitude Era. Because of the Attitude Era, you couldn't get these names. There's a lot more competition from WWF and WCW. If you were a name, you were snapped up. And you weren't, generally speaking, available for shows like that. So WWF was doing too much business to worry about little shows, so they didn't have them anymore. WCW wasn't in the business of doing spot shows up here. So that was an aspect of the business that fell to independent people. And that's what independent wrestling was around here until NECW had started up, and a couple of others had started up, Joe Eugenio, Yankee Pro Wrestling, and so forth, that were doing local shows with local people. It became much more viable the more the Attitude Era had taken the names and siphoned them out of the equation. So there's your wrestling history lesson for the week.
There you go.
Yeah.
It still works. It's a formula. It still works to this day that we still use.
Right. So if you want to see that Century Wrestling Alliance show, the link is in the description below. That's the secret link, which is not a secret anymore. So check that out. It's well worth your time. It's about a half hour, a little bit less than a half hour. Well worth your time. The Century Wrestling Alliance was a cable access show. Back when cable access was a thing. It's still a thing. It's just not a thing for wrestling anymore. You don't see wrestling shows on cable access since the internet took over, and we pioneered that. So the internet, but putting wrestling on the internet. Yes, you're welcome. Exactly. Right. Well, it was just easier. With cable access, it was town by town. So Tony had a network of towns that ran his show, and he would have to physically go over with a tape and give it to
bicycle it. Yeah.
Right. So Boston got a tape, Revere got a tape, Melrose got a tape. It was produced out of Melrose, but Saugus got a tape. They would bicycle those tapes around, or they'd make 8 or 10 copies, and they go to different. And sometimes there were places out of state that would get the copies and run them. Connecticut was one. We ran a bunch of shows with Rumble in Connecticut. He had a cousin who owned a Toyota dealership in Waterford, Connecticut. So we would run down there. We actually did shows on the car lot.
Oh, yeah, you got shut down, didn't they?
Yes, they got shut down because the lot was on a main road, and the matches would be going on like on a Saturday morning, and they would have cut-ins, live cut-ins on the local Fox stations from the matches taking place outside in the parking lot of the dealership. And as people were driving by, they'd rubberneck to see, and they were like rear-ending each other because let's run, boom, So it was a little crazy, but anyway, those were a lot more fond memories of Toyota of Wallingford, Connecticut. I said Waterford before. I meant Wallingford. No. Funny, one day we had King Kong Bundy on one of those shows, and he pulls up in his car, and his car's like smoking and ready to fall apart. And of course, it's a car dealership. So by the end of the show, his car was like new. They put it in the thing and fixed it all up for him. So, but anyway, what are we watching this week? I'm going to start on this because I've got a couple of things that I want to make you aware of. If you're not aware of them already, are you guys aware of something called Pluto TV?
I've heard of it. Yep.
Right. It's a free service. It's a bunch of channels. You can get it on your Roku, or you can get it online. You can get it on the internet, or you can get it on Amazon Fire, or any of those things. And it's a channel that has lots of sub-channels in it. And there's a couple of channels that our listeners would be interested in. One is there's an Impact Wrestling channel that shows nothing but old Impact Wrestling matches, old Impact Wrestling cards, all day, 24 hours a day. I happened to be watching it this past weekend, and what did I see on there but a couple of matches from the British Invasion. Doug Williams and Nick Aldis, or Brutus Magnus, as he was called then.
Yeah.
Which was great stuff. That's very underrated stuff. The Impact Wrestling, or the TNA Wrestling stuff. Very, very underrated. A lot of stuff I missed I didn't get a chance to watch. And I'm watching this, and this is really great. I mean, produced to the hilt. Yep. The crowds were live. I mean, it's amazing how good it was. And you just get a whole new appreciation of it watching it again. And the other thing they have on Pluto TV is in their Latin section, their Latino section, they have a AAA channel. So if you're into Lucha Libre, if you want to see some great Mexican wrestling action, they've got a 24-hour AAA channel It has all the old AAA matches, all the old AAA cards. If you're looking for stuff to watch and haven't seen any new things, or looking for something that maybe you weren't aware of, check out Pluto TV. Stuff is free. I also happen to watch MLW. They restarted their promotion.
Yeah, they just jumped up, exactly.
Yes, I happened to catch it last night and very much enjoyed it. It's good stuff. They've got a tough road because there's so much competition for talent, but they've got the roots of a pretty good roster. A couple of NECW alums on there, Richard Holiday being one of them.
Yep.
Who's doing pretty well down there. And
he just signed a deal. Just signed a long-term deal, 3 years, I think.
Right. Good guy, definitely talented. Paul Roma trainee.
Yes.
He's somebody that is going to make some noise eventually. He's got a ways to go as a worker, but he's getting there. Kev, what are you watching this week?
I haven't really had too much time to watch that much wrestling. I did catch some of Impact this week. I did catch some of AEW this week.
Mm-hmm.
Watching lighthearted stuff as far as Impractical Jokers or episodes of Community on the Netflix. So just things to try to lighten the mood.
Joe, what about you?
So I managed to catch a few things this weekend, and I want to say something. So we were talking last week about the women, and two of the women we were talking about were the Sea Stars. Now, Impact Wrestling has started up their Knockouts Tag Team tournament, and the Sea Stars are actually in the tournament. So that just happened.
Very happy for them.
Just talking about them, which is dynamite. So that's going to be awesome to watch. Also, Sasha Banks makes her Mandalorian debut. The TV show The Mandalorian. For those of us who have Disney Plus and are big Star Wars geeks, I think I've made a Star Wars reference at every one of these podcasts so far, so you can tell where I'm at. But she did a dynamite job. It looks like she's going to be there for a while, following in the footsteps of The Rock and John Cena. She's made her debut, and let's hope it goes absolutely hog wild. She's one of our Boston girls, and Sheldon, we were able to have her first match in NECW. So
yes, indeed.
From the little screen to the big screen, we were there from the very first day. So love to see it.
Right, and she's a great girl. Really, really a nice girl. All of my memories of her are just what a nice kid she was. So I'm very happy for her success. I hope it continues for a very long time. And I'm glad to see that. Glad to see people making progress in their careers.
And branching out.
Yeah, absolutely.
I do want to ask you guys a question.
Yeah.
So, the whole Zelina Vega. What are your thoughts on? I mean, the whole third party thing. I mean, that we could do an entire show. Right. Just on that. And I know we probably are starting to run close to time anyway. But I mean, letting her go, and now, from what I understand, from what I hear, she had a big meeting with SAG, the Screen Actors Guild,
right?
And the president, Gabrielle, I forget how to say her last name. She was on 90210.
Right. That surprised me. The fact that the girl from 90210 was the president of SAG.
Yeah, right.
Not taking anything away from that. It just surprised me.
Right, and there's some big talks going on there with that. I mean, but that could change the business.
I think there's a lot of contractual changes coming soon.
We're going to see some big changes.
Yeah, it's going to shake up the industry, I guess.
Right. Well,
it's been a long time coming.
Right.
Now, my question is, though, in the original contracts, did it say anything about them not being able to be a part of these third-party companies?
No. No. It was a big loophole.
I don't see how already signed a contract just add on after.
You just broke up a little bit there, Kev.
Yeah, we lost you there. I think he was trying to figure out how they could change the contracts But that's how they write.
I mean, think about this. Think about your credit card company. How many times have they changed the deal, and you have nothing to say about it? You know.
Exactly.
Here's the thing, and WWE, even though their revenue from house shows and so forth is down, they still were making record profits. They chose the wrong time to squeeze the wrestlers.
I agree.
It's just the wrong time.
Well, the reason why they're making such record profits is because their expenses are way down.
That's correct.
When you're not on the road, you don't have to pay for anything. They were only running one building for the longest time.
But
and the talent was hurting.
Put yourself in the shoes of the talent. They're not wrestling 5 days a week or 4 days a week or whatever it is. They're wrestling 1 day a week. You know?
And their contracts are written with a downside.
Right.
So it's a guaranteed downside. So if that guaranteed downside...
there are no houses. There's no houses for them to there's no pay-per-view money to speak of.
And push them, right.
There's merchandise money if you're lucky enough to be hot. But that again, is a subjective thing. Well, we're going to push you this month, so... now your merchandise is going to be hot because we've got you in the spotlight. Well, maybe we'll push you later. You can stand over here, and you go from hunger. So it's a difficult thing. They did the wrong thing at the wrong time.
Yeah.
It's like saying on your free time, Joe, you can't moonlight or do anything else.
Right. Exactly.
No Star Wars.
Exactly.
Right.
They got to understand. I mean, people have to understand that they've got to learn how to read a contract. That's the big thing, and it's okay to change it. Just because they hand it to you doesn't mean you have to accept that. You can change paragraphs, clauses. You can That's what the negotiation part of that all comes down to. And if they're not looking at what the downside of that contract is, that's the guarantee you're going to get no matter what.
Yeah, we're in circumstances.
That's where you got to live.
We're in circumstances that nobody could have predicted. Nobody could have predicted the pandemic. So this changes the whole economics of WWE because there are no house shows.
Right.
So, that changes everything right there. So the money that they're not making on house shows, they're making up for it with these Twitch channels and OnlyFans for the women and so forth.
Cameo,
right. I mean, you can't blame these guys for... And a lot of them do those things under their own names. They don't do them under their WWE persona names, which the company owns those names, so they could theoretically say, okay, well, if you want to be The Undertaker, you can only be The Undertaker on stuff that involves us, or you can only be... whatever, John Cena under whatever, but although that's his name, so whatever.
Right. But what it looks like is going to happen is it looks like WWE is probably working right now to open up. I mean, they've already did this thing on I think it was Twitter with what's their names, Retribution, where they did these little. They're up there for 24 hours. These little vignettes. And I think it's up to 2 to 3 minutes you can have filmed, and but they're going to end up doing their own channels and their own avenues where the revenue is going to go through them, and this is where where they're not going to make that extra money now. That'll all be part of the downside.
Every dollar that gets generated, they'll be lucky if they see 20 cents.
Well, you have to get over that. You have to make over whatever their downside, whatever the downside guarantee would be. Once you could generate enough revenue over that, so if it's $100,000, you gotta wait till you hit $101,000 worth of revenue on that particular way to make money for you to start generating any more money.
The thing to keep in mind too is it was just over. I want to say a little over 20 years ago where the wrestlers actually started to use agents.
Right.
And that was frowned upon for years. So this maybe SAG is that next step.
Well, there's two sides to that coin. Right? Yes, there are benefits that would come with availability of insurance and pensions and so forth, but then you got to pay dues.
Right.
You know, and who's going to dictate the work rules? Those are going to be negotiated in collective bargaining, and they may not always fall in the talent's favor. So
and not just wrestling dues.
Right.
Pay your dues, kid.
Right.
Right.
But union dues.
Exactly.
Yep.
Yeah,
Pension
but
and
you get
welfare.
your union dues. Well, yep.
Yeah, I mean, you got to pay into that stuff to get something out of it. It's not free money.
But that also will give them the right to strike.
Yeah.
And now if you have the right to strike, now you can put the whole industry on the back burner, and now what happens? So there's a lot more to this than just trying to protect someone from being an employee or an independent contractor.
And it's not just going to affect WWE. You figure AEW,
Right.
Impact, is it going to go?
Well, there's a little difference with Impact. Impact has them more as employees because he offers health insurance. He's offering paid time off. There's a lot more. They've done things a lot different there.
Right.
And I think that's another reason why this is starting to make such headway right now.
Right. Right. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see what takes place. Is it going to affect independent wrestling? No. We just don't generate the money.
Correct.
So,
You don't think that some of the independent guys are going to try to get their SAG cards?
Yeah, let them go get them. They don't have to use them.
It's not going to mean anything.
Right.
It's not going to mean anything. Although, it would be interesting because, let's say we go back on TV at some point. What does that mean? If they're SAG members,
Yeah.
If you're trying
But
to
that may also give us access to things we never had before, too.
That's true. That's true.
There's a lot of avenues here. This has got a lot of moving parts, and it's going to be real interesting to break this down as the weeks go on.
Well, in our end of the business, what we have to do to survive going forward is we have to up the ante in everything that we do. I mean, we've got to become more of a full-time business than just one show a month. That's not going to work anymore.
Right.
Well, yeah, it can work. If you don't want to make any money at it, sure, it can work. But if you want to make money at it and you want to turn it into something of substance, you've got to be running a more regular schedule of shows. You've got to be doing a lot more stuff. So, and that would be great. That's certainly not a negative. But anyway, Kevin, I think you have a question that came in this week. Why don't we get to that?
Yes. Let me pull that up. This question is actually just for Sheldon. It says, "Hello, I'd like to pose a question to Sheldon, if I could. I grew up watching the local show International Championship Wrestling in the Boston market. I was wondering if Sheldon had used any of the ideas used by ICW and Joe Savoldi as a guide as to what he may or may not do to create his own company. If there were any ideas taken from ICW, could you please share an example or examples that may have been used as a modeling guide? I imagine creating a local market area wrestling company has some serious challenges, and I remember ICW would use TV38 on Saturdays to create backstories for the characters such as Jumpin' Joe Savoldi and Kevin Sullivan, for example. Thank you from a lifetime fan of wrestling, now 49 years old, and a huge fan of NECW, Rob Skahan."
Well, Rob, thanks for the question. A couple of things. ICW really wasn't a local company, although they did many of their tapings in the New England region. Many were done up in Maine. Some were done, I believe, in Waltham at the old IBEW Hall. But it wasn't local. ICW was on all over the country. They were on small stations, low power stations, syndicated all over the United States and outside the United States as well. Did we take any ideas from it? No, not really. If you want to know what the influences of NECW were in terms of other companies, I was very heavily influenced by two. One would have been Memphis, the old-time Memphis shows with Jerry Lawler and Jimmy Hart and so on and so forth. And the other would have been World Class, just because of the style. The World Class style was that, balls to the wall, slam, bang, high impact,
Smash
high
mouth.
octane,
Yep.
smash mouth type of pro wrestling. And the Memphis stuff was very heavy on interviews, very heavy on getting the personalities over and so forth. Because when you have a local company, one of the things you have to sell is the personalities. You've got to get people invested in the individuals because they're not stars. They're not on TV. So you've got to get people to know who they are and emotionally invest in them. ICW was a lot of fun to watch because it was low-budget wrestling, and NECW was low-budget wrestling. Lower budget than ICW, actually. But the only influence, I think, when it came to ICW was just that it was possible to do it on a small budget. But ICW itself really wasn't an influence on NECW. Good question, though. Good question. Yeah. What do you guys think about influences on NECW?
With us? Oh, a lot of world class, just like you said.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Mickey Grant, the way Mickey Grant did things, it was so innovative. We had the opportunity to interview him on the Mouthpiece Wrestling Show a couple of times, and the innovative ways he got the camera and the mics right into the ring brought you right into you felt like you were a part of everything that was going on. You couple that with the fact that World Class was ECW before ECW was even thought of.
Right.
The innovative matches they had, everything from the barbed wire matches, the brass knuckle matches, the penalty box matches. Can we please, Sheldon, one day bring a penalty box match to NECW? I would love it.
I'd be open to it.
Oh, it'd be fantastic. Just so much fun. Yeah, that's I see that. And then, like you said, as far as the promos and things like that went, Memphis all day. The way it was locked down, it was great.
Right. Let me ask you guys on that line of thinking here. What were your influences in terms of wrestling? What influenced you growing up? I mean, we all grew up with WWF because we're in the WWF territory. Or if you're old like me, the Worldwide Wrestling Federation. You know, going back to the 60s and 70s. But what's the stuff that really caught your fancy, Kev?
Right off the bat, Bobby Heenan. You know, his quick wit, whether he was managing or whether he was broadcasting, even going back and watching it now, he was just so good. Heavily influenced by ECW. I remember catching that. I would read about it in magazines. I remember catching it like 1 o'clock in the morning on Telemundo. Coming home late one night, just kind of stumbled across it, so I could actually see it with my own two eyes. Just the grittiness of it, the stories were not the typical, you know, cartoonish. It just grabbed me, and I don't know. I just liked the more the smarter stories versus the typical, you know, what you were being fed by WWF and WCW.
Well, you know, whereas WWF and WCW in that era were catering more to kids and trying to appeal to more of a family audience, ECW is the wrestling that grew up, you know, the kids that were taking their prayers, saying their prayers and eating their vitamins, you know, 5 or 6 years later, they're into sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and that was ECW. ECW was the wrestling that grew up with those kids. So, yeah, and Tony Rumble used to say, he had a great line, he used to say, ECW looked like something that you weren't supposed to see.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. Joe, what about you? What caught your fancy?
Very first match I ever saw in my life was Ric Flair against Kevin Von Erich. And I was hooked from that day. I was flipping channels and World Class. It's funny because growing up in this area, of course, WWF was everywhere.
Right.
And at that time, Bob Backlund was the champion when I was watching. And so I used to watch WWF. I watched it all. Whatever I could find. I'd be flipping the channels and trying to get the rabbit ears to come in to watch whatever it was, if you could hear a bell ringing in the background. And I loved watching WWF. There wasn't a problem with that. But NWA, TBS, and World Class, that to me was real.
Yeah.
The stuff up here and up in North, that was one. But man, if you wanted to fight, those guys would fight. It was more realistic. It was more. You were more emotionally involved in how the guys were because it was more relatable. The stories were simple. The ideas of it were but they were so simple. You got it. There was no confusion. You know, the minute you start confusing people with a storyline, you've lost them. Right. You give them something easy to swallow and easy to understand. You know, why are these two guys going to fight? Yeah, well, that's it. They look like a guy. Yeah. You'd see that guy walking down the street.
Somewhere. Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
They were fighters as opposed to bodybuilders in a ring.
Right.
If you looked at Arn Anderson, he was in great shape, but he wasn't like a Rick Rude.
Look at Dusty Rhodes.
Exactly.
If you didn't think Dusty Rhodes was going to bring you out back and just tan your ass as a kid, you're like, oh yeah, you won't mess with Dusty. No way. And they brought that believability back. You know, Terry Funk. Terry Funk wasn't a jacked, but man, he was one of the baddest mother truckers you ever saw in your life.
Amen. Yeah.
You know?
You know, I've got some years on you guys, so I go back to the 60s and seeing wrestling on TV on my little black and white Philco TV set, you know, and the rabbit ears. In the 70s, every once in a while, when UHF television became a thing, we started to get other channels like Channel 27. We mentioned it before. Yep. Before it was Telemundo, it was a regular English language commercial station, and on the weekends they would have things like the roller games, not roller derby, but the roller games, which were out of Philadelphia, and they had big time wrestling from Detroit.
Oh wow!
And that was like a revelation because you'd see the matches from Cobo Hall. You wouldn't see on that too many TV matches in a studio. They did have studio TV. You didn't see too much of that. You saw the matches from Cobo Hall, the Sheik, the Fabulous Kangaroos, and George Crybaby Cannon. And back then, I had an aunt that lived in Chelsea. And whenever we went to Chelsea on the weekend to visit with her, we were able to get Channel 9 in New Hampshire. And in the summertime, you would see when instead of the Worldwide Wrestling Federation wrestling that was normally on, you would see Championship Wrestling from Florida. They would take a few weeks off or whatever, and they'd show the tapes from Florida with Gordon Soley and Jack Briscoe and all this. So, man, to see the guys that I saw in the magazines that we never saw live up here, what a treat that was. And when World Class started airing on Channel 25, wow, what a revelation that was. Because that was just a totally different style from the big man plotting Worldwide Wrestling Federation style that we saw week in and week out. Not that that was bad, not that we hated it, but it was just a revelation. Just the action was faster paced and more intense. And we talked about Mickey Grant getting the camera right inside that ring. You could hear the smack of the flesh. You could just, the sound. I actually took a trip down to Dallas in '83 because I wanted to see for myself. I wanted to see this sportatorium that looks so live and so incredible on television. And when I actually got there, what a shithole the sportatorium was. It was a big tin shack, a total shithole. They had, it was like going to a county fair with the, corn dogs and the French fries and the old time things where they sold the pictures and the programs and stuff like that. They didn't even have real gimmicks at that time, real souvenirs. They just had pictures, 8x10s and programs and whatnot. But man, I mean, when you went inside and sat down on those benches and they turned the lights on, it was just unbelievable. The atmosphere was just, all the oil people's kids, were going crazy for the Von Erichs. But when you actually went to the place, what a letdown. You actually saw that big giant tin shack.
I was just going to ask if that was a letdown or did it enhance it? Because once the action started, once the show started, it was almost like you were transformed, where you're still looking at it like, oh, this isn't what I was expecting.
Well, you drive up to it, and it's definitely not what you're expecting.
Right.
Totally not what you're expecting. But when you're sitting there and the people are so into it, I mean, it was like Von Erichs were like rock stars.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was just such a different experience. And hey, back in the '60s and '70s, San Martino, Pedro Morales, those guys were like rock stars in their own right.
Yeah.
I mean, the Von Erichs with the lights and the music, and I mean, that was a whole different thing. But no, it just whenever you saw, if you grew up watching WWF or Worldwide Wrestling Federation, whichever it was, whatever era you came up in, and you got to see something different from that really stood out.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, I used to go buy the magazines and stuff every month. I'd go hunt the newsstand for the new Wrestling Review or Wrestling Monthly or the Ring Wrestling or whatever, and you'd see all these guys in the magazines sometimes that you never saw here. Ben Justice. Who the hell is Ben Justice? I never saw Ben Justice out of Big Time Wrestling in Detroit. The Fabulous Kangaroos. They weren't wrestling in this area, during my growing up, but you could see them on Big Time Wrestling from Detroit. When they started showing that and they showed the Kangaroos, I said, oh my God. And the Kangaroos have been around since the 50s.
Right.
But in the 70s, they weren't wrestling around here. They were wrestling for the Sheik. Just incredible stuff. I mean, the fact that some territories were so over with their fan base was just amazing. Now,
well, then everything was different too.
Yeah.
It's like world class. Then when Global came out, or the AWA, you're seeing all these different things, and it's night and day between each different promotion.
Each territory had its own personality. If you go on YouTube or you go try to find old tapes of like Portland wrestling. Portland was a great territory. I mean, it was a kind of lower level than say the Carolinas or whatever, but they had great talent. They had great action.
Portland, Oregon.
Yeah.
Up in Pacific Northwest.
Right.
That's the first time in the magazines. That's where I first saw who Billy Jack Haynes was.
Right.
And I was like, out of Pacific Northwest, and I was like, this guy, look at this guy. You talk about and then all of a sudden he shows up and he's in world class. Then he goes over to the NWA.
Right.
Then he comes up to WWF for a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
And then now he's kind of gone off the deep end a little. But
well, once cable TV came in, the world of television became a lot smaller, and we started to be able to see all these different territories and all these different types of wrestling. There was that period, from around 1985 or 86 to 1989 or 1990, where wrestling was all over the place. Mm-hmm. WWF, World Class, AWA, TBS, NWA. They had different stations. Channel 66, which they had a wrestling block. They had a block of wrestling shows every day. You'd see a different kind of wrestling. So that was really the golden age, in my opinion. You got to see all these different territories and all these different styles and all these different guys, and slowly but surely it consolidated. But those are great memories. Let's pose that question to our audience and have them write into us. ReGeneration NECW at gmail.com, just like it says right below. And send us your memories. What was the first wrestling that really hooked you? Apart from, if you grew up in this territory, if you grew up in the Worldwide Wrestling Federation territory, or if you grew up in the NWA Carolinas territory, what was the first thing other than that got you hooked? I'd be curious to hear what people have to say and what people think. And also, just your questions. If you have questions for us, please send them in. We'd love to have them. I want to thank Rob, who sent that question into us this week, and hope that you keep those questions coming, because we love them. We enjoy answering those. So anyway, I think that's about it for the week. Next week is Thanksgiving. Or actually, this coming week is Thanksgiving, I should say, because we tape the show on Thursdays, and we release it on Tuesdays. So this is Thanksgiving week. We want to wish you all happy, safe, and healthy Thanksgiving. I hope you all have something to be thankful for. I know I do. I'm thankful for the two guys that I share this podcast with, amongst many other things. And we look forward to seeing you all next week. So for Sheldon Goldberg, Joe Matarazzo, Kevin Castro, take care, and thank you again for joining us.
The ReGeneration podcast is a production of New England Championship Wrestling. To send us questions, comments, or feedback, email us at regenerationnecw@gmail.com.